Today's lesson, we're going to introduce evolution, and question of the day in Monday's box, define the words lethal and viable. Lethal, your classmates define it as deadly. Viable means living or able to live. Also for class or tonight, brainstorm or research an organism and an adaptation it has. What does that adaptation help it to do better than if it did not have it? And be prepared to share that information. We started with a new note pack today with Unit 6, Theory of Evolution, and reviewed the fact that it has five different lessons, and these are the topics we'll be focusing on the next few days. We also took a look at some pretty fun videos called The Evolution of Dance that you can find on YouTube, where we looked at how dance has changed over the past few decades. And it kind of got us thinking about what evolution means. Evolution helps answer some questions. And if you take the time to pause the video and read these, they may not be things that you've thought about, but may kind of pique your curiosity now. For example, we talked about like why whales have bones similar to arm bones that humans have, and many students were demanding that whales don't have arm bones and they don't have arms, and we're going to take a look at evidence that proves otherwise. So again, pause your video now and read through these. We also talked about what a theory is, and in science, a theory is a statement or model that's been tested and confirmed many times. And they usually have the ability to explain a wide variety of data and observations. They're used to make predictions, but they're not absolute. And we spent some time in class talking about the fact that not absolute means that it's not 100%. They serve as a model of understanding the world, but they can be changed as the worldview changes. And we talked about the cell theory and how the cell theory was not absolute when first discovered. As microscopes have increased their ability, what they can do, we've learned more, and the cell theory can adapt and to change. So we talk about being careful, not saying evolution's just a theory. The theory of evolution remains one of the most useful theories in biology because it does explain a lot about living things. And I shared a video called "Isn't Evolution Just a Theory?" We also talked about the history of life and how evolution accounts for a large diversity over long periods of time. So this is going to tie in what you learned in earth science last year, because we use a lot of evidence found based on geological change. And in class, I ask students to share, how can the earth change? And people suggested erosion. They talked about earthquakes and volcanoes and glaciers melting and how that can change the landform. And all of that then changes organisms that can live there. So what life exists. We also talked about, when we talk about the history of life, how some organisms no longer have survived. They are extinct. And then finally, just to clarify that rates of evolution, how fast this is happening, can vary. We reviewed some vocabulary terms. The term variation you may also hear diversity. Variation refers to genetic differences within the same species. So this is the same species. This is our dogs. But you can see variation among that species. These are all Homo sapiens, or humans. And again, you can see the variation. So where does this come from? Well, it comes from mutations. Mutations create diversity or variation. And here's your house cats. Mutations over time are going to accumulate, and that's where you see these this diversity. A species is an organism that's able to produce fertile offspring. A lot of students still have the question, what does the word fertile mean? Fertile means that offspring is able to reproduce and have offspring of its own. The opposite of fertile would be something that's sterile. Sterile means that you can't have offspring. So when you put a bunch of species together, that's where you have a population. It's important to understand that populations evolve. not individuals. We then watched a short video clip about Charles Darwin, and your classmates jotted down a few pieces of information for you. Charles Darwin, and this is an old picture of him, he was a naturalist. So he's a scientist who studied the natural world. He was English. He was only 22 years old, so that's definitely not him in this picture. He's only 22 years old. We went on a 5-year voyage. And if we take a look at the map over here, his 5-year voyage went to the Galapagos Islands, where he gathered a lot of data, looking at a lot of different organisms. And he eventually suggested all living things were related. At the time of his research, most Europeans believed a literal interpretation of the Bible of where Earth's creation originated from. And so Darwin was very controversial at his time. Other scientists did influence Darwin's theory. So you may want to pause the video now and write down the contributions of Charles Lyell, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, Thomas Malthus, and Alfred Wallace. And again, you may want to pause so you have time to write down these notes. What Darwin did know is after reading Hutton and Lyell, he realized if Earth can change, might life change as well. He also realized that it could take a lot of years for life to change. And if that was the case, he was projecting that Earth was very old. After reading Malthus, remember, if you go back, he was the economist who said human population was growing faster. He realized something must determine, well, which ones get to survive and reproduce and which ones don't. We concluded class with distributing homework tonight, an article for you to read about selective breeding. And in that article, you're going to learn that selective breeding is actually a form of artificial selections where humans select versus natural selection when nature selects. And what's being selected are favorable traits. And we took a look at a link. And this is a wonderful website to link you to. It's the Understanding Evolution. And we looked at how farmers and breeders have been using the idea of selection to cause changes in plants for a long period of time. So this is an example of the wild mustard and how they've used it to actually create popular crops like cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, and kohlrabi. And we also took the time to then go back and look at this idea of, who gets to pass on their genes. An individual like Joe, who's at age 20, he has children, his children have children, he's passing on his gene. If an organism like Jim does not mate, Jim does not pass on his genes. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind as we can continue. And a way to pass on the power of these genes to the next generation is by mating and by producing offspring. Okay, so I hope that everything is helpful. Make sure you get the notes from class today and you catch up by reading the article on selective breeding.